Good evening. My name is Margery Gans, and I'm a member of the board of the Writers' Room of Boston. I am delighted that you could join us this evening for the March interviews in our virtual series, The Writers' Room After Dark. And this began in 2022. And we've had a few interviews, and tonight but before I should say it, for anyone new to us, the Writers' Room of Boston is a co-working space. It's in downtown Boston, and it's for any and all writers, whether you're established or emerging, who want and or need a quiet place to write. Because the room is open 24 hours a day, and it provides desks and silence and the quiet companionship of other writers. The room has been serving writers of the greater Boston area since 1993. And during and since the pandemic, the room's been offering online resources. We have a reading series that invites two authors to read their works and an online writing group with prompts and discussions. And then in 2022, we inaugurated this series of interviews. And we talk with guests who are knowledgeable, not just about writing, but also about, for example, getting your work to a publisher, agents, and guidance for online publishing. So far, we've interviewed both authors, and then we interviewed experts in audiobooks for writers who want to get their work out in that format. And those interviews are on the website. And we continue to seek a wide range of people whose expertise we can tap. So if you're curious about the room or you have any questions about how it works or its programs, check out the Facebook and Instagram page at the Writers of Boston. Also, our website has photos, announcements, and that's where you can find recordings of past readings from the room and interviews. We would love to have new members, and we have different levels of membership. We have a virtual membership for those who can't easily make it to the room. So if you're interested, please check out our website at writersroomofboston.org. I should say the series is made possible by grants from the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, and we also rely on friends. So if you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button on the website. Also, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available there. Tonight, we have Anjila Duva and Henriette Lazaridis. Anjali is an Indian American writer. She's an editor, a planner, a publisher who was raised in France. She is the author of Faint Promise of Rain and has been a finalist for a Massachusetts Cultural Council Artist Fellowship. Anjali is a co-founder of the Galliot Press, an instructor at Grub Street, and a former fiction co-editor at Solstice Literary Magazine. She co-founded and runs the Arlington Author Salon and is also a co-founder of the Indian, should have asked the pronunciation of this, Kathak dance nonprofit Chandika. Anjali was educated at Brown University and MIT, and you can find her at her website, which will be posted on the chat. She also has a Substack page. Henriette Lazaridis is the author of The Clover House, a Boston Globe bestseller, Terra Nova, which the New York Times calls ingenious, and Last Days in Plata, which is publishing in April 2024. She's a first-generation Greek American, and she earned degrees in English literature from Middlebury College, Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar, and the University of Pennsylvania. Having taught English at Harvard and at Grub Street in Boston, she runs the Kruna Writing Workshop in Northern Greece. Her essays and articles have been published in Elle, Forge, Narrative Magazine, the New York Times, New England Review, and elsewhere. An avid athlete, Henriette writes about athletic and creative challenges at the Entropy Hotel on Substack. Her website will also be on the chat. So as Anjali and Henriette and I talk, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat section at the bottom of your screen, and I will check those as we go along. And I will make sure if we don't use them during the body of the interview, I'm going to leave time at the end for those. All right, so let me come back. There I am. So I'm going to start, and Henriette and Anjali, you can come back on screen so we can meet you and see you. Great. So the three of us have talked a little bit about your press, and I really do want to get to that. What I would love to hear about from each of you, though, a little bit first, is who you are as a writer and, you know, how you got here. So we spend a little bit of time with that, and then we'll come to the press. So Henriette, you want to start since you're on my left?
Okay. Well, I am, as your bio said, the author of these three books, and I think what's maybe more important is that each of them is very different, which seems to be kind of how I go about things. I'm interested in a range of different things, and so my novels, while there are maybe some themes in common among them, they range far and wide from Antarctica in 1910 to Athens in 2018 and Greece in another more contemporary era as well. And I think that the fact that I'm technically a non-native English speaker, or let's put it this way, Greek was my first language, that informs a lot of what I do as a reader and as a writer. I'm really keen on the details of language. I'm fascinated by etymology and just the storytelling that I grew up with, because my father used to tell me stories from the Odyssey when I was a little girl as my bedtime story. And my mother behaved as though the gods and goddesses were like our family members. She would tell stories about them as if they were like, well, you know, your relative. So I think that kind of informs my approach to telling stories, and it's really important to me. And I guess the other thing I would say is I actually think of writing as a way to build community, and maybe that's why creating this press with Anjali seemed like the natural thing to do that I've been wanting to do for a while. But it's a solitary practice, but we do make teams. We do come together in communities and groups, and I'm very, very keen on that balance and combination. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a wonderful introduction. I think part of what stands out to me, obviously, is your interesting background. And one of the things that stood out for me personally, which if we get to, I will ask, is sort of how you develop that range from sort of Greek history to Scott, you know, in the early 1900s, but we can come back to that. Um, and yeah, and storytelling, I think my sense is that's really important to both of you. I mean, it may be important to everybody, but there's a way in which sometimes there are those of us for whom telling a story really feels like the central thing that we want to do. So,
Hmm.
yeah. Anjali, tell us about you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for having us tonight, and hello to whoever's out there. Um, yeah, so it's interesting, what Henriette was saying about storytelling and community. I, like Henriette, have a sort of multicultural background, which you mentioned when you read my bio. So I'm my mother was a nice Jewish girl from Brookline. My father was a sort of wild-haired scientist from Calcutta, and they raised me in France. So I grew up speaking English and French, at the same time. And because my whole childhood was straddling three continents, three very different cultures, three continents, I always felt both an insider and an outsider, whether I was in the US, in the Boston area, because it was pretty much the only part of the US I knew growing up. So New England or France or India, I felt like I belonged, but I also felt on the outside. And wherever I went, I had to kind of explain some part of myself. And wherever I went, I was observing myself and other people in that milieu with the um, sensibilities of a person from those other two places. And like to this day, I mean, I've been in the US since 1991. And to this day, I just think that like yellow school buses are so funny and American, you know, and like that lunch boxes that kids bring to school. And I have two kids. My oldest one is 19. I've packed a lot of lunches, but uh, they still strike me as very American. And then I go to France where I grew up and I'm like, oh my God, that's so French. And so there was always kind of this insider outsider needing to describe either to myself or to other people something. And I think looking back, that probably had a lot to do with why I became a writer, although I came at it through a completely different career path. I was an urban planner doing infrastructure planning, water and wastewater infrastructure in developing countries, bringing, trying to extend service to um, what is sort of an un-PC term, consider, you know, it used to be called slums, you know, in the outskirts of big cities in developing countries. Um, and everything I zigzagged, and every single time I made a zig or a zag, it made a lot of sense at the time. But it took me through a lot of different types of jobs and careers. And I was a project manager for a while. I worked in healthcare, but always there was a sense of needing to tell a story, and needing to rely on writing to communicate effectively, to make people want to change, to bring about change. And ultimately what brought me actually to the writing of my first book, Faint Promise of Rain, which you mentioned, which takes place in 1500s northern India, Rajasthan, is that I was the co-founder of a dance organization around this type of dance, Kathak, which you did say properly. And Kathak is in North Indian traditional classical dance, and it's a storytelling dance. It used to tell the stories of Hindu deities and sort of bring these stories to villages. Then under Muslim era, it got brought into the Muslim courts, lost a little bit of its storytelling background, but gained a lot of sort of technical aspects from dance, from those regions. And then anyway, now it's a blend. I'm really drawn to things that are blends, it turns out. It's a blend of both Hindu and Muslim aesthetics, and it's a form of dance you can see performed on international stages now. When I started that dance form, I then sort of did co-found this organization to promote this dance and to teach it. And I discovered this whole history of the dance and how it mirrors the history of India over the centuries. And that gave me the idea for my first book. So I had actually not gone into any writing programs. I had always been decent at writing, but and interested in it sort of on the side, but I'd never actually thought it would be a thing I would do as like a career. But there it was, this idea came to me of 3 books set at different times of sociopolitical change in India that was mirrored in this dance form. And so that's my first book, which came out almost 10 years ago. And that was, you know, at the end of the Hindu rule and beginning of Muslim rule in India. Then I have another one that's with my agent now, currently called Between Light and Earth, which is end of Muslim rule, beginning of British rule. And then I have a third one planned, but I did a little detour because writing historical fiction is a lot of work. I mean, writing any book is a lot of work, but the historical fiction also has a lot of research. And I needed a break from that. And so I'm actually currently writing a contemporary book, contemporary fiction set on Cape Cod, where I've spent a lot of time. But for each of my books, I'm really, really interested in the place and the layers of sort of infrastructure, both physical and social and economic, that make a place run, or that make a place function, that brings people together, or that sort of rends them apart. And so that is a common theme in my books, whether it be contemporary Outer Cape or 1500s Rajasthan. I'm very interested in the intricacies and the layers and the multiplicity. And, you know, this is where Henriette and I kind of some of our interests in place and language and history and story come together, so that we have a similar vision in what we want to do moving forward, even though we have different approaches and different background and different skill sets.
That's what I was thinking as both of you were talking, that you each kind of have storytelling in your bones. I mean, that it sort of comes from your histories and it
Mhm.
comes from who you are and how you've lived.
Yeah.
Also, even the notion of community, the fact that you've lived on different continents and, kind of bring things together in yourself,
Mhm.
even.
Yeah.
Um,
When I think, what Anjali said about being the outsider, that's not something that I felt particularly, because I don't have an accent in English. I mean, I sound like I'm
Mhm.
from here, right? But
Yep.
I also don't have an accent in Greek, and so
Same.
I could
Yeah.
always pass. People would always be a little puzzled why I
That's
didn't
the thing. It's like
know.
being the secret outsider, right?
Yeah. So, it's a little bit like you're more observant.
Mhm.
Well, that
Mhm.
sounds like a very hoity-toity thing to say, but
No.
I think that certainly when you are in a position of going from one culture to another, you're on some level, especially if you're an adolescent. In those years, I remember being very keen to not utter a single word of English when I was in Greece. I did not want to be
Huh.
pegged as the outsider that in some essential way that I was. But certainly you watch a lot. It's fascinating. It's a joy to be in the place that you're not usually in,
Mhm.
and so you soak it all up. And I think that's a good skill to have for a writer. It doesn't mean that the only people who have that skill are the people who grow up in a
Right.
sort of bicultural environment, but it certainly helps you form that you train that muscle, I think, quite a
Mhm.
bit when you're
Yeah. Well, I
shuttling
think,
back and forth between
yeah, and I
cultures.
think, Angela, what you see is the differences to some degree that those of
Mhm.
us who just grew up here, like school buses are school buses and lunch boxes are lunch boxes.
Mm.
But if I go to a different culture, one of the things I love about it is things that are so ordinary,
Mhm.
suddenly so fascinating.
Mm.
Um, and I should just mention, anybody who's seen me on Zoom knows that this is Julie, and
I was gonna ask for the name of the cat.
yes, it's Julie, and I don't want to lock her in the bedroom, and I have an apartment where
Oh.
it's hard to lock her anywhere. So she's 19 years old. She does not know
Oh
it.
my goodness.
Yeah, so at least she's not disruptive.
She deserves to go
Anyway,
wherever she wants to go.
back exactly. So back to yeah. So yes, so let's get to your press. And I just want to read a couple of things that were on the website because I thought they were so interesting. These are quotations. Um, that you were interested in the intersection of currents and cultures. And you say, we seek to highlight important writing that is essential to our changing world, including writing that defies traditional categorization and that takes artistic risk, and that you want to re-envision the publishing process. And it just sounds fascinating. So I'd love to hear how you found each other and then just expound on this press and what you hope to do.
Well,
Sure. How should we start?
I'm going to start
Okay,
because
you start.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
you start.
so for many, many years, I would say, and probably Anjali would say separately as well, I would say like, publishing is broken when I have a press. And I would say it that way, like, ha ha ha, it's a joke. When I have a press, I'm going to do things this way. And I started saying it and then saying it in front of Anjali, and she would say, yeah, what I agree with. And I said something about one of these things about, when I have a press, and she said, if you start your press, I will do it with you. And I knew that she really meant it. And I also knew that we would be very compatible. And so we said, we'll do it, but we'll do it when I'm 70. I'm 63 now, and this was like 2, 3 years ago. And we said, we'll do it when I'm 70, because Anjali's kids would have been completely out of the house, and I would have been like in a sort of a new act of my career. And we looked at each other. We kept saying, if when we have our press, we're going to do this XYZ different, better way. And Anjali said to me one day, why are we waiting until you're 70? We need to do this now before anyone else does it, and because the need exists now, and we can actually make an impact if we get started now. And so we embarked 2 years ago on a very careful, thorough, thoughtful, organized, thanks to Anjali, approach, very systematic, gradual covering of all the different areas that we would need to understand in order to make the press the kind of organization that we wanted it to be.
Yeah,
So you did a lot of research.
We did a lot of
did.
research.
Yeah.
Focus groups. I mean, and I was talking about this with somebody recently. Maybe it was Henriette, you. Yes, it was actually, but we were talking to somebody else too about how I'm kind of grateful. I am grateful that we are starting this now and not as like 25-year-olds, because we have a pretty vast network of friends and colleagues and acquaintances and people we can ask for advice, and people we can interview, and people who can connect us with other people. And so we've been doing a lot of that. And we've done focus groups with readers and with writers, and we've talked to other publishers and printers and
Editors.
publicists and book cover designers and agents and editors and like everybody, all the types of people involved, booksellers, a lot of booksellers. And essentially what the crux of the issue, I mean, anybody who is watching this, I'm sure has stories about how the publishing industry has not served them well, or how it's been frustrating, or but and for a while we were thinking, we have ideas, practical ideas with solutions on how to improve the entire process, all the way from how submissions are taken in and what is being solicited, to how one works with authors, to how one produces the books more quickly and efficiently and environmentally sustainably, to where they get sold and how to support authors' careers beyond their launch. I mean, it's the whole
Wow.
it's the
Soup
whole
to nuts.
shebang.
Soup to nuts.
Yeah. And for a while we were thinking, okay, we really need to figure out how can we position our ideas within the existing publishing industry. And after about a year of research, we realized, you know what? We need to actually re-envision the whole thing. We need to be like, here's traditional publishing, and we're going to be over there, because we just need to start from scratch. And the sort of two big reasons, one is that, and Margery, we were talking about this in the sort of green room, as it were, just before we went live, is that traditional publishers traditionally incur a lot of upfront costs. They pay some amount in advance. Sometimes it's tiny, sometimes it's big. They decide based on, I don't know, chicken entrails. That's not fair. They make their decisions based on more than that. But sometimes from the outside, you kind of wonder why one person got this advance and one person got much more. But so they pay in advance, and then they incur the cost of producing the book, right? The cover design, interior design, the editorial, all that. And then they incur the cost of a print run of however many books they decide to print. And because they have all those costs up front, they're going to be very cautious about what books they take on. And they're going to take understandably, this is all understandable. Like, we're not going to bash any part of the industry. Like, we understand that because they have these costs, they're going to want to take on books that they strongly feel they can sell. Fair enough.
Books where maybe they know how to sell the book because they've sold something similar before. They know how to promote it. They know the numbers because they can extrapolate. Well, we had a very similar book last season and we know it did XYZ in numbers, so we can expect the same figures to appear, in the process of publishing this book, which is a lot like the other book. And so, if I can jump in here, Anjila, I mean, we think that it tends to favor a more cautious approach to the selection of the books that you're going to sell and that you're going to buy as a publisher, because, as Anjali said, it's understandable. You are going to go with what you know did well before, because you've already invested a tremendous amount of money in the thing that you've chosen.
Or you'll go with a known name, right? There's like also the celebrity or the big name.
Right.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, which I don't think I would have thought about, probably unfairly, is that it is a big risk. That in some ways they need to be conservative and stick with what has already worked, because they can't really take the risk of stepping out and having the whole thing bomb.
Right.
I
Using
mean, and
that
in the
model.
best cases, I think what happens is in the bigger houses, and this is the thing where you have to be very large in order to benefit from these kinds of diversified risks, where you can bank a lot of money on a known entity, and that known entity will do well, and the success of that one will allow you to take the chance
Right.
on the book like The Clover House, which was not a known entity. It was a debut. It wasn't going to knock anyone's socks off. I mean, I love the book, but still. But they could take a chance on me because that year they had published 50 Shades of Grey. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's
They-
how it
they-
Right.
goes.
Yeah.
But but that requires a certain size. And so if you're a smaller press,
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
function in that
And
same way. You can't diversify in that same way.
exactly. And so we know personally of people whose work is fantastic, like should really be out there, but is getting not getting acquired because they're not a known name, or the publisher thinks that it's sort of too niche or whatever. They don't know how to market it. And so a lot of people are getting cut out of the publishing experience. And then in addition to that, because of the way that bookstores work, and we love bookstores, so I have bookstore owner friends, but bookstores have finite shelf space, and bookstores need to know where on those shelves each book goes. Crime, mystery,
Right.
all the different genres and categories. But as you now can tell, that Henriette and I push back against the idea of separation and categories. We both strongly feel that there is richness to be found in the places where things overlap, ideas, cultures, backgrounds, where they overlap and they mix, and something new and different and unique is formed. And so we would like to see books out there that don't fall into a category. And I've had that own personal frustration where my book, which takes place in 1500s Rajasthan with Indian characters, it's family saga, it's multicultural, it's historical fiction, it's dance and other arts related. And so where does it go? Where does it belong? And so, and to tie into the earlier what we are talking about with publishers, that because bookstores have finite space, let's say they figured out where to put the book and they ordered 30 copies and only 7 have sold. After 6 months, they got 23 copies left. They need to send them back. There needs to be a place that they can send them back. And that's a cost, often to the publisher, right? The publisher has printed the book, sent it to the warehouse, paid for warehousing, paid for it then to be shipped to the bookstore. And then it's sent back to the distributor, who charges a reshelving cost. And all of this cuts down on the amount of profit to the publisher. Not to mention that bookstores, because they operate on such slim profit margins, they buy the books for 50% discount. So if your book on the back says it's $20, the publisher has set the price at $20, the bookstore is buying it for 10. So that's already $10 just like poof, vanished. It's money that's not going to the publisher or the author.
And I think it was a bit of a thought-provoking moment for us when we sort of thought about those numbers and thought, we know so many bookstores that we love to go to that sell products that are book adjacent, right? They sell pens and notebooks and scarves and socks and
lots of socks,
reading adjacent, right? And the truth, I believe, I wouldn't be speaking out of turn to say this, that because the profit margin is so tight, they have to sell these other products to diversify their risk, right? And diversify their source of income. But it seems, it really is thought-provoking to me that you have a business where you are a bookstore, but the industry is currently exists in a way where the bookstore, whose job is to sell books, can only make money by selling something other than books. That's a problem with the system. you just can't keep banging your head against that particular wall because it's a wall. You don't need to bang your head against a wall if you look at it in some other way and find a different way to do things.
So the obvious question, I mean, you're
What are we doing?
describing a situation that must be true for so many businesses, you know, and because we live this country, I mean, lots of places, but this country in particular is pretty driven by profits and money. And so what can you do differently?
So,
Yeah.
here, Henriette, I'll start, and then you can take over. Like,
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
start like about submissions and this and that, and then you can take over when you want to take over.
Okay, give me a nod and I'll go.
Yeah, sure. Right. So we've taken a look at, first of all, our own, what we've experienced is all the frustrations in trying to get published. I was published with a hybrid press, and Henriette has been published by sort of the big five, but also by an indie smaller press. So we've had various different publishing experiences, and we have a lot of friends with a lot of different publishing experience. One of the things that we know that everybody experiences in trying to query their, send out their manuscript or their queries is the very high percentage of times that you never hear back. Right. It is demoralizing. Yep. It is frustrating. Even sometimes you don't hear back from an agent who asked for your pages and maybe asked for your whole manuscript and maybe had a 20-minute phone call with you. And then,
been there. Yep.
Yeah. So that's thing number one. So we've devised a system which we're going to roll out in May. People will see, where we are going to take in submissions in such a way that that does not happen, in such a way that we are controlling our workflow and only taking in as much as we know we can handle, so that we can respond to every single query. So that's thing one.
Because I should say here that the editors who don't respond, they're not being churlish.
No, they're not. They're overwhelmed.
They would like to respond, but they are simply overwhelmed.
Right. We spoke to an agent friend of ours who told us that she had 1,500 queries sitting in her inbox. And she's like, I physically cannot do that. I cannot. And so she was like, I'm going to delete the oldest 3 months and hope that they requery me, because what am I supposed to do? We're all human.
Authors don't know that.
No, they don't.
That's the thing. You don't, if you don't hear back, you don't know. And it's pretty hard as an author not to take it personally. It's just
Yeah. And I think the pandemic reminded people a little bit about how much everybody is dealing with, but still there's that feeling like, can I just get a automated response, something? Or if it's got to the point that I've submitted my manuscript, I mean, come on. So that's one piece. Then we are going to be open to agented and unagented authors. Now, if you're unagented, we are going to be very clear. You really need to be sure that your work is the best. You've made it. You can possibly make it yourself. You've had beta readers. You've taken some classes if you can afford them. So. But we are open to unagented, because we know we have wonderful friends with amazing writing who are having trouble getting an agent. So that's thing two. Thing three is we are going to be super transparent. We've launched a Substack newsletter, and we are talking about where we're stumbling, what we're learning, what we're surprised by, what we're trying to do. We're developing a Kickstarter. We've been open about that process, about how it was declined at first, but now we're revising it. We got good feedback, because there's really a lack of transparency. People don't talk about the money. They don't talk about what constitutes a successful book, what numbers, how much is selling, and so we want to kind of break that down, and we want to encourage our authors to collaborate and to share. And so we are going to be offering a flat advance for everybody. We're not making decisions about, we think this book is going to do better than that one. Everybody gets a flat, small advance, but everybody will also get higher royalty rates. And the way we're going to do that, and after this part, Henriette, you can take over, is that we are, for our print books, we are going to be print on demand, which means that we incur the cost only when there is a purchase made. A customer orders a book, and that's when it gets printed. So it does mean that the per unit cost of production is higher. It costs much more to print a book one at a time than to do a print run. However, we don't have to warehouse, we don't have to distribute that way, we don't have to deal with returns, and our books will never be out of print. So
everyone will buy directly from you.
So Henriette, you can take it from here.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, that is actually
Partially.
our hope, because it's a way for us to be able to learn about our customer. We would get the data, we would be able to hone our advertising or marketing in the future. Obviously, it's a way for us to make the largest possible profit because we're cutting out a middleman. But one of the things that we also want to do, although this also counts as direct sales, is that we have a system which is a little bit marketing, a little bit distribution, kind of both at the same time, if that doesn't sound too strange. But it allows us, without going into detail, it allows us to make our books available in physical places that are not bookstores. Where and we know that there are neighborhoods in Boston that don't have a bookstore for, for some distance. So that's starting to change, actually, but still there are plenty of parts of Massachusetts that don't have a bookstore, or parts of all over the US that don't have a bookstore, but they have other places. They have community centers, they have coffee shops, they have hotels. These are other, well, I don't want to go into
we're working on some partnerships.
But
we're being sort of deliberately cagey because we don't have all the details yet, but we have talked to people about, and we've sort of prototyped an approach where people will be able to access our books in physical form and ebooks. We're also going to have ebooks, downloadable ebooks, in places where our books are not competing with a lot of other books, and in places where we are reaching the readers directly.
There they are. And one thing to say about that is that, and what's great is that there's more and more conversation about the problems with the current publishing industry, and people are beginning to write more sort of statistical analyses and presenting the data about the statistics around book selling, not just now, but over the past 100 years. And there's some really interesting kind of reminders that books they weren't always sold in this particular way. We tend to think, publishing as we know it, as if there was some sort of high point, some heyday of publishing 30, 40 years ago, when you could go to the bookstore and all they sold was books, and you could get wonderful, beautiful books that you knew exactly where they should be shelved and all of that. That was also a time when publishing was very male and very white and very trust fund. So it was not the high point for everyone. But even going back 100, 150 years ago, there were many different ways to produce and sell a book. And it doesn't have to be done in this model that we have now, where the publisher presents it to the bookstore and the bookstore sells it. Apparently, I think that this is correct. This is a reliable statistical source, that not that long ago, many, if not most, books were sold in department stores, not in bookstores at all. So this is just an interesting thing to remember, that we needn't be trapped in the current business model that we're all kind of railing against and being frustrated by, everyone from editors to publishers to authors to readers. That isn't how it's always been done, and there are lots of different ways to approach it. And so we're just moving the history of publishing along one more step in a different direction, and we're going from different approaches that have evolved or that have existed over time, not only in publishing, but we're looking to other industries to borrow modes of production, modes of
marketing and distribution.
Yeah, all of this, scheduling, all of that. We're not just sticking with what exists already within publishing, but we're looking to other industries for examples and for systems that we are putting into place.
And some of those industries are like fashion, or hospitality, or architecture, or my background in urban planning in terms of sort of project management and how to get a book out there more efficiently. And we're drawing from our different types of experiences and our openness to doing things differently and pulling from different places.
I mean, in some ways, it sounds like a joke, but it's also true. I mean, if bookstores are going to sell socks, and, calendars and
Right.
pens, then there's no reason not to sell books in a
In
place
other
that sells
places.
socks.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Right,
mean,
exactly,
Exactly.
right.
exactly.
Yeah,
You
it's
can sell
true.
a book where you get your socks.
That's
And
right.
and we will be actually also selling other things, although not socks, as far as I know. But we are going to, we want to really create a community. We ideally, most people don't really care who the publisher of the books are that they read, right? Whether it's a Atria or Hachette or whatever. I mean, some of them that are very crime fiction or Harlequin have very specific. But we would actually like our brand to be known, not only for the types of books that we put out, but also for the types of experiences that we are going to be offering readers. So we really want to support our authors in making connections, direct connections with their readers, and in being able to have multiple streams of income by offering classes, manuscript consultations, visits to schools, calendars of photos from the place where their book takes place,
Uh-huh.
podcast episodes. So we plan on having a page on our site for each of our authors through which they can sell more and interact more, and where readers can go for more, because we really want to create like a depth of experience with these books, for the reader, and to kind of counter, we're all inundated with so many words, so many little things that kind of like blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
And we want to provide an opportunity to kind of sit and go deeper with one story and be able to have multiple experiences with it and around it. And that's something which, if we know who our readers are, because we're going to be selling mostly direct, we can cultivate that. We can cultivate a community of readers and authors, that just will be a sort of richer experience for both.
And
I mean,
I do want to say too that like we know that a lot of these kinds of things, the essay, the calendar, the tour, all these kinds of things, oftentimes authors are expected to produce these things
For
now in the
free.
current model.
Mhm.
But the trouble is that they do all this work and it's not compensated. It's an
Yeah.
expectation. And so in this, we have kind of a little bit of a hill to climb, because we're basically hoping to educate our consumer and say, you have to pay for something.
Mhm.
Our authors, like for instance, when we were saying earlier, I think Margery, something about the capitalist, that our country is driven by a need for profit. Well, so are we.
Mhm. Yeah. Right.
We're not.
Right.
We are building into our business model from year one, even though it's unlikely we'll hit that mark. We're being
Mhm.
realistic about it, but we're building our salaries into the business model because we are not doing this in a volunteer effort.
Right.
The
We
whole
have
point,
volunteered enough.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And the
Yeah.
whole
Don't
point
don't do
is
that.
to prove a concept, and more than prove, let it thrive. The concept that people can actually make money
Mhm.
through books,
Mhm.
publishing them and
True
writing them.
stories.
So
Yes.
if we had to do it on a volunteer basis, our model would have failed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So at the same time too, we know that other presses expect authors to write lots of content. I'm doing it now myself because my book
Mhm.
is coming out in April, and no one's going to compensate me from these essays for these essays that I'm hoping to place in different venues. But we'd like to have something in addition to that, or to counter that, where the author writes something and or creates an experience that's extra, that's special and unique to them and their book, and you actually might buy a ticket for it the way you would
Mhm.
buy a ticket for a movie or a
Mhm.
beer
Hmm.
or a thing you saw on streaming
Mhm.
platforms. So it's the same idea.
So you start this fresh and you talk about you want to know your audience. And it seems to me there's sort of like a chicken eggy thing. You've got audiences and you've got books. How are you going to sort of think about, like, one of you mentioned, there are publishing houses that do mysteries. There are publishing houses that, I mean, I don't even know that much about different publishing houses, but there are genre publishing houses
Mhm.
as well. How are the two of you going to think about, well, who do we want to be as a publishing house?
I mean, we want to be, publishing some of those excellent, important stories that are getting overlooked. So what we were talking about, books that are cross-genre or that take some kind of artistic risk, where a traditional publisher will be like, oh, I like this, but I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So like, we're going to pass and cheer you from the sidelines. And so, we want to be the publisher who will take these books and who will show that there is an audience. And, for a given book, I mean, to be completely transparent here, we've calculated that in order to break even on a single book, we need to sell 2,500 copies of it.
Oh, wow.
So,
I know, it's a lot.
writers
It's a
don't even
lot.
know that. Nobody tells
Yeah.
them that. No publisher
Yeah.
says we're going to try to sell X number of copies of books to break even.
That's a lot of copies.
It is a lot of copies. It is a lot of copies.
It's a lot of copies, but also
That's quite a ratio.
reasonable number.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that a little bit of what's behind your question, I think, Margery, is sort of if our genre, or if our ethos is to publish books that are at the confluence of currents and cultures and genres, well, what genre is that? What do we, how do we find the reader who says, oh, me, I like the ones that are a lot of different things? Because those are harder to identify. It's harder to have, people don't tend to have a sort of genre loyalty to the genre that does all the different things. And so I mean, that is a challenge for us, is to sort of say, no, it's the book that, one of our books might be a really literary mystery, and another one might be a family saga that's also a comedy, or another one might be a psychological portrait that's also a historical novel. I mean, these things don't sound incompatible to me. But those kinds of things that are at the edge of where someone might say, well, this is too many genres, or I don't know what to do with this. And the writers that we both enjoy the most tend to be the writers who do a little bit of everything. Well, that does.
But here's the thing: what is going to be in common among our books is, as Henriette mentioned at the beginning, we care a lot about language. We care a lot about the craft. These will be books where, and that doesn't mean it's all going to be literary, right? But it means that the language is going to be very important. The way the story is told is going to be very important. And all our books will be ones where you savor each page, you savor the experience, and they're thought-provoking, and they lend themselves to discussion, or wanting to look something up, or wanting to extend the experience of being in that story.
But you're also turning the page. It's not like, oh, that was lovely, let me walk away and go watch some television.
Right.
It's going to be like, this is a great story. I want to keep reading this story.
Yeah. I mean, partly I'm asking because I assume at least some percentage of our audience are authors who may be listening and going, oh my God.
Right.
I want to see it. So in that sense, I mean, I think people blend all the time, whether they know it or not. And then maybe they go back and edit to try and go,
that's the thing. Yeah.
Tighten it up. Will you do poetry as well? Or is it all going to be?
Not at the moment. We're going to be doing, and it's not for any lack of love for poetry, but we don't feel sort of qualified as editors of poetry. For the moment, we're starting out with fiction, creative nonfiction, and memoir.
Okay.
And we'll see. We're not doing YA or middle grade or kids or poetry for the moment.
And again, that's because
or essay collect.
our
Well,
own.
we could actually.
It's more because of our own editing limitations, I think.
Yeah, so it's what we feel. Yeah, there could be a time, if this takes off, where we bring on more editors and we can expand. But we're starting, with what we feel that we can handle well.
I mean, I'm going to stop a minute and check the chat, see if there are questions, but I also just need to say, it sounds like you've taken on a lot of work.
We've done
it's a fair amount of work, and we've been we're planning on launching a Kickstarter campaign to sort of help us with because we're planning to do 3 books per season, 2 seasons per year to start out with our first books to come out in fall of 25.
Okay.
So that's sort of the current goal. And we also plan to run some classes and some multi-day workshops as well.
Okay, so there weren't any particular questions, so I'm going to ask my questions. So when you talk about, I mean, really, it just is astounding to me how much you're taking on, and it sounds fantastic. When you talk about also running classes and workshops, what kinds of things will you be doing?
We'll be teaching 3-hour little seminars on Zoom on elements of craft and storytelling, or not story, writing. And then the workshops we'll do. I already run a workshop in Northern Greece, and so we're going to fold that into the Galliot Press aegis, and then we'll run another one in the States. So there'll be two a year, one abroad,
On
one
Cape Cod.
here. And the classes will sort of run them on a fairly regularly scheduled basis, from a sort of curriculum of maybe four topics or five topics. I think that I forget how we did the math.
Yeah.
But there will be.
And I mean, eventually we might bring on, guest instructors, or some of our authors may end up teaching. But for the moment, we're starting out with the two of us, with what we've already have experience teaching.
And when you say on the Cape, are you doing it all online, or is any of this in person?
No, the Cape will be in person.
And
So
in
the
Greece
Cape
it's
will
in
be a
person.
5-day. Yeah. There'll be a 5-day workshop in November on the Cape, which will be, part courses teaching discussion of craft, part time to read, maybe part-time sharing and critique. And then similar model for the one in Greece. So those who want to travel and have a whole different experience can do it in Greece, and those who need to stay closer to home for whatever reasons can do it on the Cape.
There's still
we'll
a couple
see how this
spots
goes.
left in my workshop for this summer. I think I put the URL
For Greece?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested in the Cape myself, honestly.
Yeah.
Not that I wouldn't love to go to Greece, but yeah, it looks like
all that. So we are about to launch. We just finalized all the content for our website. Currently, it's a sort of placeholder, not a placeholder, but kind of like just the basics. But we're going to be launching the whole site. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe next week, and that will have our calendar of events and our description of our submission system and more background and just more stuff.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like all the websites are on the chat. So that's fantastic.
Oh, good.
And I guess I just want to come back to one thing. And then Henriette, I know you have a book coming out very, very soon, and we wanted to make sure we wave the flag about that.
Oh, thank you.
But I think this is kind of what I'm hearing, because you both talked about community, and it sounds like this is really, you want to make sure that you kind of are creating community, that the two of you are already a community, but that you've really you've brought that into what you're doing as well. And I assume that's pretty conscious, because it's full of it and it's wonderful. Yeah.
I would
definitely.
say, for me, it's always been very important. I'm an only child, and contrary to popular belief, I think only children, we're not the ones who say everything has to be my way. We just say, oh my goodness, you're including me in a group, and we're so thrilled that we're happy to go along and see whatever movie anybody's seeing. But also, I think as an athlete, I've always really valued being on teams, and I really bring that to my writing. I think it's really important to create teams and community, and I learned so much. It's the cliche, but it's really true. When I teach, I learn so much from being in the classroom on either side of the desk, so to speak. And
I see. I'm sorry.
Communities.
Yeah.
I just saw that there's something on the Q&A, and it says the host has disabled the chat. Could you please relist your links? So maybe I can put them in.
Should we type our answers?
Yeah, I'm going to put them in the chat.
Sure.
Here.
Why don't you go ahead? I don't know what happened.
Do that.
But
yeah.
sure.
Sorry out there. I'm typing here.
I'll just do them all.
There's one. Whoops. I see answered. And then, okay, are you doing them all, Henriette? I'll let you.
Yeah, you
I'll let
talk,
you do that.
I'll type, but I don't know your
Okay.
Instagram.
Oh, I'll put my Anjali Duva. There we go.
So if you want to do
Um,
that, Anjali,
yeah.
Henriette, if you want to tell us about your book that's coming out,
Oh yeah. That's much better division
about
here.
that,
Okay, I'm gonna send.
You talk about your book, Henriette.
Okay.
because we have about
Well,
5 minutes left, just so you know.
okay. What should we say? Well, so my previous book was set in 1910 in Antarctica and in London. So of course, the natural
Uh-oh.
follow-up to that would be a contemporary novel set in Athens. I
Of
mean,
course.
wouldn't you go in that direction?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So that's what Last Days in Plaka is about. Well, that's where it's set, and it follows an old Athenian woman and a very young and fairly naive Greek American woman of 26 or 24, I forget how old she is. And the old woman is sort of thinking about her life and trying to reconcile her memories with certain lies about herself that she likes to tell. And the young woman is trying to find connection to her parents' past in a sort of inchoate, abstract way. And they come together around, it ends up being, they come together around old French film and studying the Book of Revelation through their little tiny church and various other things. And it's a little bit Elena Ferrante meets the talented Mr. Ripley, if you want to think of it that way. Because
All
the
right,
the old
well,
woman
yeah,
is not exactly as she seems.
but not in Antarctica. Okay,
Not in Antarctica.
that,
In,
yeah.
My Q&A window is frozen, so I actually can't type into it.
Well, I'm back in the, oh,
There's a chat versus the Q&A, and
I'm going to
I
send
they're
know.
both
more links.
frozen.
I'm looking at both, and Leslie just texted me. Let me go back to the Q&A.
I'm putting.
In fact, my Q&A window is now. Okay. The person who posted said got the links now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
You know,
I think
That's a
we're
good
If
start.
for any reason it doesn't, we
Go
can
in
put
there.
them all on the website, but it looks
yeah, that's
like
fine.
it's back on now, I hope.
I mean, honestly, they're all basically our names.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
And if you
They're all
start there,
basically
like,
our names, so
Yeah,
it should
yeah.
be easy to
yeah,
find.
and galliotpress.com.
Yeah, and we can
Uh-huh.
send that out in an email to everybody. We'll make sure that that goes out. So we have just a few minutes left. Is there anything else that you either want to say about the press or about your own writing? If we had another half hour, I would really want to hear about both of your writing, I have to say.
Well, I will say that anybody who's interested in kind of following along on the journey of this press and finding out, when the opportunities to submit open, but also just if you're curious about how this is working and what we're doing, and sign up for our Substack. It's free. Substack newsletter at galliotpress.substack.com. And what else should we say, Henriette?
Yes, if you follow the newsletter, you'll know things like
Yeah.
when our Kickstarter is going live and when the website is open, and
when there'll be opportunities to get involved, because we do hope to involve the community in helping us get off the ground and helping great books get out there. We're planning to build like a street team of people who might be kind of our eyes on the ground in different parts of the region and country, and say, oh, such and such, this is a great festival, you should have a presence there, or this business place would be a great place for you to sell your books, or whatever it is, and kind of have a broader reach that way.
And I should say, in the minute that remains, I guess, that the name Galliot Press.
Oh yes.
We chose this after much consideration and wailing and gnashing of teeth. A galliot is a ship that uses both sail and oars, and therefore is very nimble and adaptable to conditions, and it takes people and lifts them up and carries them all forward. And also the name is vaguely French sounding, and I'm a rower, so you have Anjali's French and my rowing, and it all seemed like a very good image for what we have in mind for the press.
Yes.
So that's
I love it.
That's why we are a sea change for publishing?
I like it because for some reason for me, I was raised on 19th century novels. And I don't know why, but I was. And it's got a very 19th century sound. It sounds very romantic to me somehow. So I think it's a wonderful, wonderful name. And I will just add that when I went on, you have this whole list of what do we know and can tell Kickstarter is that. And then you've got this wonderful bullet points really of who you are and what you're working on and what you hope for. And I think this is what you're talking about with transparency. But I read it and I thought, oh, this is so interesting. I wish I knew this about other kinds of businesses, you know,
Right,
that
yeah.
I might want to be involved
Yeah.
in and know something about how they run. I mean, you've taught me things tonight that I thought, geez, I didn't know people who read submissions were that overloaded. And it's
Oh,
good to
yeah.
know. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
good to know.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So
Great.
thank you incredibly. This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank
And
You'll be
you.
interested. I'm interested. And maybe I'll see you on the Cape. I don't know.
thank you. And thanks to
Excellent.
those who joined us and
Yes,
those
thanks.
who watched us at another point.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm
Yes,
gonna
thank you so
hang it
much.
up. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.
All right. Bye.